Bryan, what is the federal government doing to help lessen the costs of natural disasters that are occurring across the country?
You know, one of the things that they're taking a look at is, as you have noted, we've seen an increase in the number of presidentially declared disasters over the last few years. We've seen an increase in the impact of those disasters. And so what we've seen is Congress look at those costs, particularly at the federal level, and start asking how can we reduce those costs to the federal taxpayer. And they've tasked FEMA with taking a look at coming up with some ways that could do that could reduce the cost to the taxpayers, reduce the impact of those future disasters.
And what are some of these things that the federal government has come up with?
Well, we've seen a number of reports from the Government Accounting Office, the Congressional Research Service, the Congressional Budget Office, the Office of Inspector General for Department of Homeland Security, offer up ideas such as changing the threshold for a public assistance disaster as declared by the president. So basically making it more expensive for a state to get a presidentially declared disaster. The level of damages would have to be higher. They've proposed the potential for a change in the cost share ratio. So right now, generally when you have a presidentially declared disaster, 75% of the costs are paid by the federal government and 25% by the state and locals. There's been some idea that that could shift to a 60-40 or a 50-50 ratio going forward. So those are two of the things that have been proffered up thus far.
How will this new policy impact the states and the state programs to address natural disasters?
Well, there's several potential consequences that come out of the FEMA deductible proposal. It would basically require the states to pay a portion of the cost before they would be eligible for federal disaster costs. And so it would encourage states to set aside funding to help cover those costs. Much like you would on a deductible on your car insurance or your home insurance, you as a state would be responsible for the first X million dollars worth of costs in a disaster. But it would also provide credit for those things that you have done within your state to get ready for a disaster and to help reduce the impacts of a disaster. Things like building codes, things like having a state-funded disaster fund, things like state funding for emergency management programs. Those state funds that could go towards reducing the impact of future disasters in that state.
So these states that have adopted such mitigation strategies would be better off and in a better position to respond to a disaster vis-a-vis both FEMA and on the ground. Is that correct?
That's right. The actual physical impact from the disaster could be lessened by having a built environment that is more resilient to the hazard. The ability of the state to respond to that disaster would be improved by having stronger emergency management programs, by having stronger programs within the state to deal with those situations, and theoretically reduce the need to rely on the federal government to help respond to and recover from those incidents.
And what should state legislators specifically understand and know about the disaster deductible?
State legislators should pay attention to this process because regardless of whether this rule passes or Congress takes action, there is going to be an impact to states and there's going to be an impact to state budgets. It will either become harder to get a disaster because the threshold has changed, or the state will see less money coming in after a disaster and therefore states will be on the hook for those additional funds, or the deductible will be in place and states will need to both budget for that deductible as well as do everything they can to maximize the credits and reduce that deductible amount. So they should understand, first of all, what the process is going to look like, and secondly, how they can contribute towards improving their credits. What are the things that they can do as a legislative body and through the budgeting process to maximize the credits and improve the built environment in their state?
We have been talking with Bryan Koon with Florida Department of Emergency Management. On behalf of NCSL, I'd like to say thanks.
Thank you.